On the early morning of May 27th, in the year 1940, precisely at a few minutes before 8 o'clock, Captain Jack Churchill found himself in a perilous position, crouching behind the remnants of a crumbling stone wall. The setting was near the small and largely neglected French village of Lepanet, a place that was already scarred by the chaos of war. As he observed the surroundings through the thin veil of morning mist, his eyes fixated on 5 advancing German soldiers. They moved steadily through the fog, their figures emerging gradually into view as they made their way toward his concealed position. At this moment, Churchill was a man of only 33 years, having spent 14 years since his graduation from the esteemed Royal Military College at Sandhurst. Despite his extensive military training, he bore no confirmed kills in combat, a fact that perhaps betrayed his subdued style of fighting or the quiet nature of his engagements. The formidable German Wehrmacht, what many considered one of the most powerful military forces of the era, had already demonstrated its devastating speed and efficiency by crushing Poland in just 36 days. Now, their mechanized might was devastating France. Massive tanks, known as panzer divisions, were pushing forward at a relentless pace of approximately 40 meters per day. The resolute British Expeditionary Force, which was hastily retreating from the advancing Germans, was now in a chaotic passage, desperately trying to escape the encroaching tide of destruction. Over the past 72 hours, Churchill's own unit had suffered the loss of 11 men, casualties marking the brutal toll of this retreat. The Germans had the advantage: superior tanks, faster aircraft, and highly coordinated units that moved with precision. British soldiers, caught in unrelenting combat, perished by the hundreds along every road leading to the port of Dunkirk, where evacuation efforts were underway. The retreat was turning into a rout. Officers hurriedly burned classified documents in ditches to prevent their capture, while sergeants hurriedly buried equipment they could no longer carry, and ordinary soldiers, overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion, threw away their rifles in a desperate attempt to gain speed. They were rushing toward the safety of the coast, trying to escape the encircling enemy. But Jack Churchill was an entirely different kind of soldier. He was not running. Instead, he carried an unusual weapon, a 6-foot-long English longbow, capable of drawing 70 pounds of force. This bow had an effective range of about 200 yards in the hands of a skilled archer, a distance that would challenge most shooters, but that Churchill knew how to exploit with deadly precision. No ordinary soldier, he was a true expert in his craft. Nearly a year prior, he had competed in the World Archery Championships held in Oslo, finishing in 26th place among 63 contenders representing 14 nations. While not a champion, his skill was undeniable. He could reliably shoot a playing card at 50 yards, and more astonishingly, he possessed the ability to strike a man fatally with an arrow long before the enemy heard the whistling flight or felt the sting of the shaft-piercing flesh. At that moment, a German patrol had drawn within about 30 paces, close enough, and yet far enough, to be within striking distance of death. Churchill's keen eyes identified the leader of the patrol, a sergeant who appeared seasoned by past conflicts, perhaps having fought through the Polish campaign. The sergeant was methodically scanning the surrounding hedge, glancing into windows, always on alert for suspicious activity, rifles, machine guns, grenades, and he was apparently unaware that a medieval weapon was aimed directly at him. With calm and deliberate motion, Churchill drew the bowstring back to his ear. The familiar creak of the U-shaped bow signaled the release of tension and the readiness for the shot. His fingers found the same anchor point he had used tens of thousands of times during practice sessions, an instinctual grip that had become almost a part of him. It was a motion rehearsed so many times it felt natural, a reflex. He had participated in countless target shooting competitions, aiming at stationary targets, where he could fine-tune his aim and technique. But this was different. This time, he was about to shoot at a living, breathing enemy soldier at a mere 30 yards, an act of lethal precision that was both ancient and radical in the context of modern warfare. In a heartbeat, the arrow was released. It streaked silently through the air and struck the German sergeant squarely in the chest. The man collapsed instantly, a silent victim of this unexpected and deadly shot. The shaft was buried deep within his torso, and the entire incident washed over in a moment of stunned silence. No cry, no scream, just a sudden, deadly silence. That was the first confirmed kill of a longbow weapon in a European conflict since the 17th century, an unprecedented event. It marked the last documented instance of a longbow being used successfully to kill an enemy combatant during the whole of the Second World War. This extraordinary act occurred because one British officer refused to accept the notion that technological advancements, tanks, aircraft, machine guns, had rendered the ancient longbow obsolete and irrelevant in the face of modern war. Churchill's boldness and unconventional approach set him apart, embodying a spirit that refused to be bound by the limitations of contemporary warfare. What was the story of this peculiar and highly unconventional soldier? The British military system, at the time, did not quite know what to make of Jack Churchill. A graduate of Sandhurst in 1926, he initially served with the Manchester Regiment in the faraway and challenging jungles of Burma, demonstrating his versatility and adaptability in diverse environments. He had spent a decade developing his skills as a traditional, disciplined infantry officer, learning the craft of modern warfare. However, by 1936, he had grown disillusioned with peacetime military service, finding it dull and uninspiring. So he made the controversial decision to resign from the army altogether. Following his departure from active duty, Churchill pursued a markedly different path. He worked as a newspaper editor in Nairobi, Kenya, immersing himself in a new world of journalism and communication. Additionally, he explored his artistic side by appearing in several films, showcasing his talents as an archer and a bagpipe player. Notably, he featured in a minor but memorable role in the film The Thief of Baghdad, which allowed him to combine his interests in acting, music, and weaponry. His diverse background, part soldier, part artist, part adventurer, captivated those who knew him. Yet, it was his unwavering willingness to embrace the ancient, the traditional, and the unconventional that made his story truly remarkable. Throughout his adventurous life, Winston Churchill had experienced many extraordinary moments that set him apart from the typical soldier or officer. One such remarkable story involves his daring rides across the rugged landscapes of Burma and India, during which he traveled approximately 1,500 meters through unfamiliar terrain on his motorcycle. These journeys weren't gentle rides. They sometimes led to unpredictable and dangerous encounters. On one memorable occasion, Churchill's motorcycle collided with a water buffalo that was calmly grazing on a rural road, causing a spectacular and unexpected crash that could have ended quite badly, yet he emerged unharmed. When the outbreak of the Second World War was officially declared in September of the year 1939, Churchill, who was already a well-known figure in British political and military circles, didn't hesitate for a second. He immediately returned to serve in his regiment, eager to contribute to the war effort. However, his return to active duty was not in the usual fashion. Churchill chose to rejoin not as an ordinary officer, fulfilling the standard expectations of military hierarchy, but rather as a completely unconventional and fiercely independent personality. He arrived at his unit carrying a longbow, a weapon he had spent years mastering and that he had competed with at an international level, demonstrating his passion and skill. Alongside this, he brought with him his personal Scottish broadsword, a traditional and formidable weapon known as a basket-hilted claymore, reminiscent of the swords carried centuries earlier by his ancestors when they fought in historical battles. To add to his peculiar array of medieval weaponry, Churchill also brought with him a set of Highland bagpipes, which he had learned to play during his years in Burma, turning these instruments into symbols of his fierce individuality and unwavering spirit. Many of Churchill's fellow officers regarded his conduct with a fair amount of skepticism and curiosity, often labeling him as eccentric at best, an unusual and somewhat unpredictable character. Some, more harshly, considered him mentally unstable due to his insistence on wielding such archaic weapons and his unconventional tactics. Even the high-ranking officials and commanding officers within the military perceived Churchill as a potential liability, questioning whether his eccentricities would serve the greater good of the armed forces. To make matters more complicated, the War Office, which was responsible for establishing military regulations, had no particular rules or policies that addressed an officer's desire to carry medieval weapons into the battlefield, especially when facing modern adversaries equipped with some of the most advanced weaponry of the era, such as the feared German panzer divisions armed with 88mm guns. Despite all the disapproval and confusion from the military hierarchy, Churchill remained entirely indifferent to their opinions. His passion for history and traditional warfare ran deep, and he had dedicated many years to studying military history in great detail. He understood well that, in the context of combat, technology, and accuracy, modern rifles had the upper hand over longbows at long ranges. A rifle could fire approximately 15 rounds per minute, dramatically outpacing the roughly 10 arrows a skilled longbowman could shoot in that same period. Yet, Churchill also grasped a different, subtler truth. In close-quarters combat, such as during ambushes, frantic hand-to-hand conflicts, or moments of chaos, the psychological element of warfare could be just as decisive, if not more so, than sheer firepower. He believed that a man charging at you wielding a massive broadsword, shouting a thunderous Highland war cry, could create terror more profound than that caused by a man ducking for cover behind a machine gun. The terrifying sound and presence of a soldier brandishing ancient weaponry in the chaos of battle could unnerve enemies in a way no modern technology could replicate. Furthermore, Churchill understood that the silent, swift kill of an arrow, fired from a concealed position before the enemy even realized it was there, held a psychological advantage unparalleled in the modern battlefield. Such psychological tactics had the power to inspire fear and confusion among enemies, often turning the tide of a confrontation in an unexpected manner. In the tumultuous spring of 1940, between the months of May and June, the British Expeditionary Force faced perhaps its most harrowing moment at Dunkirk. During this critical period, they managed to evacuate approximately 338,000 soldiers from the beaches of northern France, as German forces closed in relentlessly. The evacuation, often called the Miracle of Dunkirk, was a desperate and chaotic retreat. Most soldiers left behind their weapons, military vehicles, equipment, and even their pride, as they made their perilous escape across the treacherous waters. Many returned home exhausted, battered, and disillusioned, with the ominous threat of a German invasion looming over the British Isles within a matter of weeks. Amidst the retreat and chaos, Winston Churchill was not among those who abandoned their spirit or their attachments. He returned home with his trusty longbow, his formidable Scottish broadsword, and his Highland bagpipes, symbols of his personal ethos, resilience, and indomitable will. In the midst of the retreat, Churchill had ensured that his company, or at least part of its personnel, followed him through the chaos, fighting with unconventional weapons that seemed more suited to centuries past. Through his actions, he had personally killed enemy soldiers with weapons that belonged in a museum, an anachronism in the modern mechanized war, yet he proved that his old-fashioned armaments could, in his hands, be deadly and effective. These victories weren't the end of his extraordinary pursuits. They marked only the beginning of his next adventure. For those curious about how well Churchill's medieval arsenal held up against the elite German forces, particularly the formidable Wehrmacht's Sonderkommando units, one only needed to look at his actions on the battlefield to see it in action. The stories of his unlikely combat style and medieval weaponry continue to resonate, illustrating a man who believed that sometimes the oldest methods of warfare carried the most deadly power. Such stories serve as a potent reminder of how courage, tradition, and a fierce will can defy the expectations set by modern technology. Soon after his dramatic experience at Dunkirk, Winston Churchill's extraordinary resolve led him to volunteer for a new, secret project being quietly established by the War Office, one that would come to be known as the Commandos. These specially trained units were meant to undertake daring, often suicidal missions deep behind enemy lines, raids into Nazi-occupied territories designed to sabotage and gather intelligence. The training for these commandos was envisioned to be harsher and more punishing than anything the British Army had previously attempted, preparing soldiers for the most perilous and unforgiving operations imaginable. Churchill, ever the unconventional warrior, made a bold request. He wished to bring his sword and longbow, symbols of his personal combat philosophy, on all his operations with the commandos. His request was approved, an acknowledgement of his unwavering belief in the power of traditional and psychological warfare, even in the modern age of mechanized fighting. By December of the year 1941, Churchill would be leading men onto a frozen Norwegian beach at dawn, the sound of bagpipes rising sharply into the Arctic wind, a haunting and inspiring melody. As he raised his broadsword high above his head in readiness, he was prepared to demonstrate that, sometimes, the most ancient ways of war could still be the deadliest and most effective. This episode in Churchill's life underscores his relentless pursuit of victory, combining history and combat instinct in a manner that defied convention. His willingness to embrace the old and the new, to fight with a mixture of tradition and innovation, made him a legendary figure who believed that true courage and ingenuity could transcend the bounds of time, making even ancient weapons relevant in the most modern and deadly conflicts. The origins of the British Commandos can be traced back to a period of extreme necessity and urgent improvisation. It was in the hot summer months of June in the year of 1940, when Britain found itself standing solitary and vulnerable, facing the formidable forces of Nazi Germany without any immediate allies. The vast majority of the British Army's equipment and resources had been depleted or lost during the chaotic retreat at Dunkirk, leaving the nation exposed and defenseless. At that critical juncture, the threat of an imminent invasion cast a dark shadow over the island nation's future security and sovereignty. Responding to this peril, the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, issued a clear and resolute demand: the creation of a specialized fighting force capable of striking back at the enemy, even if on a limited scale. The aim was not necessarily to match the enemy in traditional, large-scale battles, but to demonstrate that Britain was still capable of resistance, of offensive action, and of resilience amidst adversity. The core idea behind this newly forged unit was both straightforward and uncompromising in its brutality. Small, highly trained squads of soldiers would undertake daring and covert operations along the enemy-occupied coastlines of Europe. The missions assigned to these teams would be perilous and complex. They would destroy vital enemy installations, eliminate German personnel, collect crucial intelligence, and rapidly vanish into the shadows before reinforcements could be summoned. These clandestine raids would serve multiple strategic and psychological purposes. They would weaken the enemy's infrastructure, disrupt their operations, and instill fear and uncertainty. The nature of these missions made them inherently dangerous, demanding not only physical courage, but also resilience and ingenuity from those involved. The training required for such tasks was intense and relentless, designed to push volunteers to their absolute limits. Only volunteers could join these elite units, and among the first to answer the call was Jack Churchill, a man whose name would become legendary in the annals of special operations. Churchill didn't hesitate. He volunteered immediately, driven by a fierce sense of duty and a desire for combat. In late 1940, he became a member of the 3rd Commando Unit, fully immersing himself in the grueling program of training that followed. These commandos trained in the rugged and often unforgiving landscapes of Scotland, primarily in the mountainous regions surrounding a historic castle called Airy. Their training was rigorous and comprehensive. They marched tirelessly, covering 30 miles each day while carrying full loads of equipment, practicing in freezing waters to perfect amphibious landings, and fighting in conditions that tested their endurance to the brink. They learned to kill silently and efficiently, using knives, garrotes, and even bare hands, developing skills essential for covert operations. Live ammunition was often discharged over their heads during combat exercises, forcing them to maintain composure under extreme stress. Men who could not keep pace, who showed any signs of weakness or hesitation, were swiftly and shamefully sent back to their original units, regarded as failures in this highly selective environment. Among all the trainees, Churchill distinguished himself remarkably. He excelled in every aspect of the training. Although he was older than most of his fellow volunteers, he possessed a strength, stamina, and determination that set him apart. He could march for longer distances, shoot with greater accuracy, and fight with more intensity than men who were 10 years younger. Moreover, Churchill possessed a unique set of skills that made him invaluable to the unit. He could accurately shoot an arrow at a target up to 200 yards away, demonstrating a precise marksmanship that was rare. He could march into battle while playing the bagpipes, a haunting and morale-boosting practice that underscored his unique personality. He even managed to handle a broadsword with the flair and skill of a medieval knight, an ability that perplexed and astonished his comrades. Initially, the other commandos were unsure what to make of Churchill. Some thought he was merely showing off his eccentric talents, while others believed he might be downright insane. Yet, as the training continued and they observed his unwavering dedication and exceptional skills, they began to comprehend the deeper purpose behind Churchill's seemingly odd behaviors. Churchill's choice to carry ancient weapons and artifacts was not rooted in a misguided sense of nostalgia or nostalgia for antiquity. Instead, it was a calculated reflection of his profound understanding of the nature of war, which extends beyond mere killing and destruction. War, he understood, is fundamentally about psychology and the human mind. It involves intimidating the enemy and creating an environment of fear and confusion. When a German soldier faced a typical rifle, he was familiar with the weapon and knew what to expect. He had been trained against such threats and understood the danger. But when a soldier encountered a madman wielding a sword, screaming and blowing bagpipes at the same time, the reaction was entirely unpredictable. The German combatant, faced with such an unconventional and terrifying sight, would likely freeze in a moment of shock, hesitating at a crucial moment when swift action could mean the difference between life and death. In combat, even a single second of hesitation could prove fatal. By the autumn of the year 1941, Winston Churchill's leadership qualities and combat prowess had earned him a significant promotion. He became the second-in-command of the 3rd Commando Unit. Over the weeks and months that followed, the unit undertook several small, daring raids along the Norwegian coast. These operations, while individually limited in scope, were vital for gaining experience and honing their skills. However, none of these missions achieved any major strategic breakthrough. All of this changed in November, when the Strategic Command Center overseeing special operations issued a decisive order. Their plans called for the 3rd Commando to lead a major assault against the German garrison stationed on the small island of WWII, located off the Norwegian coast. This operation was designated with the codename Archery, emphasizing its importance and the precision expected of the team. The strategic significance of WWII was clear. The island controlled access to a complex network of fjords, which were frequently utilized by German ships to transport iron ore from neighboring Sweden to their European war zones. The German forces stationed there numbered approximately 150 soldiers, with defenses comprising 4 coastal artillery guns and an anti-aircraft battery. Their presence and the control they exerted over vital maritime routes made WWII an appealing target for the commandos, who aimed to weaken and disrupt German logistics and supply lines, an effort that could, in turn, hamper the enemy's broader military operations in the region. In the quiet, icy waters off the northern coast of Norway, a small fleet of specially prepared transport ships drifted silently under the tarp of darkness, their engines humming softly as they cut through the frigid Arctic night. It was late December, and the winter air was so cold that frost had begun to form on the railings of the ships, creating sparkling, icy rivulets that shimmered in the weak light of the moon. The mission ahead was perilous and meticulously planned, involving a daring assault on the fortified shores of Moy Island, a heavily defended outpost guarding the approach to the coastal town of South Vogsoy. This town was known to contain facilities that produced fish oil, which the Germans exploited for their own wartime needs, notably to manufacture glycerin used in explosives, a resource of strategic importance, and thus a prime target for the Allies. The overall plan for this operation was complex and engineered for swift, overwhelming force. It called for a coordinated assault starting at dawn on the 27th of December in the year 1941. The heavy artillery of the Royal Navy's cruisers would unleash a barrage upon the German positions along the shoreline, designed to knock out their defenses and create chaos among the defenders. Simultaneously, Royal Air Force bomber squadrons would provide crucial air cover, shadowing the coast with their bombs and enemy fighters, trying to suppress German resistance in the skies. Under this combined storm of firepower, a select group of commandos, the bravest of the brave, would land on multiple beaches at once, aiming to overrun the enemy positions before they could mount an organized, coherent defense. The element of surprise, speed, and sheer violence was the only way this assault could succeed. Few individuals in the British military leadership were as deeply involved in the planning of this operation as Winston Churchill. Known for his intense focus and relentless drive, Churchill studied every piece of intelligence with obsessiveness bordering on the compulsive. He was aware that the German garrison in this area was no ragtag group of defenders, but a formidable force, well-trained, equipped with machine guns, mortars, and fortified positions prepared in advance for exactly this sort of attack. The coastal artillery was especially dangerous, capable of sinking landing craft well before they reached the shore, making a quick, decisive strike essential. The success of the entire operation depended on rapid, violent action, an assault that would strike with the force of lightning, overwhelming the defenses in the crucial first moments. In his planning, Churchill made a daring request to lead the first wave himself onto Moy Island. This small, heavily fortified outpost directly guarded the strategic entrance to South Vogsoy's harbor. His desire to be at the front was fueled not only by strategic necessity, but also by a personal sense of purpose and grit. His request was granted, and along with it, he asked for permission to carry his sword, symbolic of resolve, and to play his bagpipes during the assault, a gesture meant to bolster morale and rally the troops with a touch of his unique spirit. Though some of his senior officers raised eyebrows, questioning his sanity or the practicality of such flamboyance during a deadly military operation, the permission was given, acknowledging Churchill's unconventional approach. The night before the attack, as the cold seeped into every corner of his quarters, Churchill examined his equipment once more, ensuring everything was ready. His broadsword, metaphorically and symbolically, was razor-sharp, gleaming with the promise of steel. His bagpipes, painstakingly tuned, were packed alongside grenades, a revolver, and a Thompson submachine gun. These were his backups, but Churchill's true intent was to lead the charge powered by steel, his sword, and the stirring music of his pipes, not merely bullets. He believed in the power of courage, steel, and song as tangible forces in battle. On Christmas Day 1941, the Commandos assembled aboard their transport ships, readying themselves for the perilous journey northward. As their ships set sail, they cut through the darkness of the Arctic, passing the rugged coasts of Scotland and venturing further into the Norwegian Sea. The temperature plummeted well below freezing, and ice began to form along the ship's railings, a chilling reminder of the dangerous waters they traversed. Inside the cramped quarters, the soldiers busied themselves, checking their weapons meticulously, writing heartfelt letters to loved ones, and attempting to quiet their nerves by distraction or prayer. The looming danger of the coming battle cast a shadow over them all, but they maintained discipline and resolve. Meanwhile, Churchill spent these final hours before combat immersed in strategic preparations. He meticulously studied maps of the coastline and rehearsed signals with his men, ensuring every command and movement was clear and practiced. His command numbered approximately 105 commandos, elite soldiers handpicked for this demanding mission. Their goal was brutally straightforward: to silence the German shore battery on Moy Island within 10 minutes of landing. Should they fail to achieve this, the entire operation would be jeopardized. Without this critical target neutralized, the Germans' artillery could destroy the landing craft, trapping the commandos in the freezing water and causing significant British casualties and loss of life. As dawn approached on the 27th of December, the fleet reached a point 12 miles off the rugged Norwegian coast, the designated launch position. At precisely 8:45 in the morning, the transport ships released their burden of proud, anxious commandos into the cold, dark waters. The landing craft were lowered carefully into the black, icy fjord. The soldiers, clad in their full combat gear, climbed down the cargo nets, their faces set with determination and nerves. Churchill positioned himself at the bow of the lead craft, his bagpipes slung at his belt, prepared to play his symbolic role. He stood exposed at the prow, fully vulnerable to enemy fire, but resolute. In only about an hour and a half, he would find himself either dead or celebrated as a hero, his fate intertwined with the success of this audacious attack. The approaching landing on Moy Island was shrouded in smoke. a curtain expertly crafted by Royal Air Force Hampton bombers that had dropped smoke canisters along the shoreline hours earlier to blind the German gunners and create confusion. The cruiser HMS Kenya, with its powerful 6-inch guns, was pounding the shore battery from a distance, her salvos echoing across the fjord with deafening thunder. Explosions lit up the Norwegian coast with the striking intensity of lightning, illuminating the rugged terrain in flashes of fiery brilliance. Churchill, standing at the front of the leading craft, was exposed, his figure a small, brave silhouette amid the chaos. The other commandos crouched behind the steel gunnels, trying to shed as little visibility as possible, but Churchill remained standing, embodying the indomitable spirit of a leader unafraid of the danger that surrounded him, ready to lead his men into the fray with steel in his hand and music echoing in his heart. He had his bagpipes carefully prepared, fully inflated, and ready to be played at a moment's notice. The shoreline was gradually drawing closer in a series of diminishing distances, first 200 yards, then 150, and finally just 100 yards away from the landing craft. At precisely 8:48 in the morning on the 27th of December, in the year 1941, the ramp of Churchill's landing craft descended and hit the rocky, unforgiving shore of Moy Island. Before any of his men could even fully organize themselves or make a move, Winston Churchill himself took a decisive step forward, walking straight into the icy cold surf that reflected the bleak winter sky above. Without hesitation, he began playing the march of the Cameron men on his bagpipes, filling the air with a rousing and unmistakably Scottish tune. The sound of the pipes cut sharply through the chaos, explosions booming in the distance, gunfire cracking relentlessly, like a sharp blade severing fabric, piercing the din of battle with its haunting, melodic call. It was, without question, one of the most distinctly Scottish sounds imaginable, and yet, here it was, resonating from a beach in Nazi-occupied Norway, a strange and stirring sight for anyone witnessing it. The German soldiers manning the shore battery, who had been expecting an attack from British troops armed with rifles and grenades, were taken aback and stupefied by the unexpected music. They couldn't believe their ears. Their training had prepared them solely for combat, fighting with weapons, explosives, and tactical maneuvers. Yet they had not prepared for someone walking calmly toward their guns while casually playing a pipe anthem. Churchill, after completing his march, gently set down his bagpipes, pulled a grenade from his belt, and without hesitation, hurled it directly at the nearest German emplacement. Without pause, he then drew his broadsword from its sheath and launched himself up the beach, shouting at his men to follow immediately. Inspired and spurred on by his fearless example, the commandos surged forward behind him, firing their Thompson submachine guns and rifles into the German defenses with determination and precision. The Germans, caught off guard and in disarray, struggled to respond effectively. Their initial confusion rendered them vulnerable, attempting to process the incomprehensible sight of Churchill leading an assault with sword in hand amidst the chaos. Within less than 10 minutes, the fierce assault on Moy Island was over. Churchill orchestrated the attack with admirable tactical clarity, systematically moving through the German positions, storming bunkers, and dismantling gun emplacements one by one. The 4 heavy coastal artillery guns were disabled through the use of explosive charges, rendering them useless for the enemy. The German anti-aircraft battery was overrun and captured intact, as Churchill's forces advanced with relentless energy. The German commanding officer, along with 15 of his men, was taken prisoner. Any Germans who put up resistance beyond surrender met with deadly force, while those who yielded were bound and carefully removed for evacuation. Churchill himself was present at every stage of the fight, at the forefront of each attack, sword gleaming in his hand, directing his troops with vigorous shouts and commanding gestures. During the melee, a German soldier attempted to disarm a British commando named Peter Young, but Young responded swiftly and lethally, shooting him with a single shot and ending the threat instantly. Meanwhile, a badly wounded German soldier, screaming in agonized pain, was given a merciful death by a British bullet, ending his suffering. The close-quarters combat was swift, brutal, and ruthless, characteristic of the ferocity of war. By 9 o'clock in the morning, Moy Island had been effectively secured and was under friendly control. Simultaneously, Churchill received a radio dispatch from the main force conducting the assault on the town of South Volksy. Their progress was slow, and they were encountering stiff resistance from the defenders. Over the night, additional German reinforcements had arrived in force, increasing the size of the garrison well beyond the earlier estimates of the intelligence services. The fighting in the town center had escalated into fierce street combat, with casualties mounting steadily as each side pressed to gain the upper hand. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, Churchill assembled his remaining forces, any troops still able to fight, and quickly commandeered a landing craft. His objective was to cross the narrow strait and reach South Volgoy, where the situation was rapidly deteriorating. Upon arrival, he found utter chaos. German snipers perched in windows and atop rooftops fired with deadly precision, while machine gun nests blocked the main thoroughfares, making progress exceedingly difficult. British commandos, pinned down behind walls and within buildings, found themselves unable to advance amid the crossfire. The commanding officer of the assault, Lieutenant Colonel John Durnford Slater, urgently needed Churchill's men to break the deadlock and turn the tide of the battle. Without hesitation, Churchill deployed his forces into the fray, determined to restore momentum and support his beleaguered allies. In the thick of the ongoing conflict, Lieutenant Colonel Jack Churchill, renowned for his unorthodox yet highly effective approach to warfare, personally led a daring flanking maneuver through a narrow side street. Drawing his sword with a decisive gesture, he advanced from the safety of cover to cover, skillfully navigating the urban terrain in a relentless pursuit of tactical advantage. As he pressed forward, his movement was a calculated act of bravery, inspiring his men to follow suit despite the chaos surrounding them. Meanwhile, the German forces, caught off balance by the relentless pressure coming from multiple directions, found their defenses crumbling. Unable to withstand the onslaught, they began to retreat, their positions gradually collapsing under the weight of the surprise attack. This fierce engagement in and around South Volgoy persisted until mid-afternoon, stretching the limits of endurance for both sides involved. Meanwhile, the commandos, with methodical precision, undertook a systematic clearing of the town, carefully moving from building to building and room to room, leaving no corner untouched. Their objective was not merely to seize territory, but to dismantle the enemy's logistical capabilities. Hence, they targeted and destroyed the fish oil factories with expertly placed demolition charges, ensuring the disruption of vital supplies. In the course of their operation, they managed to seize valuable documents and code books belonging to the Germans, assets that would prove invaluable for intelligence efforts. Their bravery and discipline resulted in the capture of more than 100 German soldiers, adding to the tally of prisoners taken during this daring raid. Yet, despite this tactical success, the cost was painfully clear. 17 of their own British commandos had lost their lives amid the fierce fighting, and a further 53 were wounded, their sacrifice a testament to the high stakes of such operations. Amidst the chaos, Churchill emerged unscathed, seemingly untouched by the bullets and blades around him. His sword, though stained with blood, remained intact, a symbol of his fierce commitment and resolve. His bagpipes, an unlikely and unmistakable accessory, were also undamaged, continuing to carry the melodies that had become emblematic of his morale-boosting presence. The victory at Volgoy, a pivotal moment in the war, solidified Churchill's reputation as both a daring and effective leader. This raid stood out as the first major success achieved by British commandos during the conflict. It demonstrated convincingly that small, highly trained units could penetrate deep into enemy territory and cause significant damage. It proved that aggressive, unconventional tactics combined with psychological warfare could overcome well-fortified positions, shattering the myth of impregnable defenses. Moreover, it confirmed that Churchill's medieval methods, wielding a sword and employing unorthodox strategies, were far from madness. They were remarkable, proven to be extremely effective in the modern battlefield. The repercussions of the Volgoy raid rippled through the German high command, fueling their wrath and determination to bolster defenses. Adolf Hitler himself was incensed by the daring assault and responded by issuing strict orders to reinforce Norway's coastal defenses. To this end, he diverted an additional 30,000 troops, an entire division of seasoned soldiers, from their initial assignments to garrison the Norwegian coast, rather than deploying them to the more pressing fronts in Russia or North Africa. This single raid by Colonel Churchill and his small force of 300 commandos had managed to tie down a formidable enemy army, compelling them to allocate vast resources in response. The impact of Churchill's exploits quickly became renowned across the British military establishment. Stories spread about the officer who played bagpipes into battle, the self-styled madman wielding a broadsword, whose unorthodox methods yielded extraordinary results. Newspapers sensationalized his deeds, leonizing him as a symbol of courage and ingenuity. Commanders from various units soon requested his involvement in their operations, and the War Office, initially skeptical of his equipment choices, gradually came to accept the unconventional nature of his tactics. By the summer of the year 1943, Churchill's extraordinary leadership and success had earned him a promotion to the position of commanding officer of the 2nd Commando Unit. His next assignment was set to take him across the perilous beaches of Sicily, into the rugged mountains of Italy, and culminate in what would be considered the most daring and innovative prisoner capture of the entire war. This daring operation involved a force of 42 Germans who, as it turned out, were about to discover the grave mistake of trying to resist a man armed with a sword, a man who believed that surrendering was far preferable to dying beneath the blade of a warrior like Churchill. The Allied invasion of Sicily, officially launched on the 9th day of July in the year 1943, marked one of the most significant military endeavors up to that point in history. Known as Operation Husky, it was the largest amphibious assault ever attempted until that time, involving the landing of approximately 160,000 troops from Britain, America, and Canada. These forces aimed to land on the southern coast of the island during the initial 3 days and to swiftly push inland. The strategic goal was twofold. Firstly, to force Italy to exit the war by threatening its control and influence across the Mediterranean. Secondly, to open a second front against Nazi Germany, thereby stretching their resources and diverting their attention from the Eastern Front and North Africa. Colonel Churchill's unit, the 2nd Command, landed at Catania on the eastern coast of Sicily, under his direct command. True to his reputation, he arrived on shore carrying what could only be described as a comprehensive arsenal, both symbolizing and embodying his unconventional approach. With his Scottish broadsword securely fastened around his waist, he also carried a longbow with arrows slung across his back, and his treasured bagpipes tucked under his arm, ready for battle. His men, initially questioning the practicality of such equipment amidst the chaos of war, soon came to respect his judgment. They had witnessed his prowess at Vogoi and trusted his instincts unequivocally. The fighting in Sicily turned out to be exceedingly brutal, with German forces responding vigorously to the Allied landings. They had bolstered their Italian garrison with elite parachute troops and formidable panzer divisions, transforming each village into a heavily fortified bastion. Every step forward for the Allies became a grueling test of endurance, requiring resilience and unwavering grit as the landscape turned into a series of fiercely contested battlegrounds. Every single road in the area had become a potential trap or deadly ambush site, turning movement into a perilous task filled with constant danger. The Allied forces, engaged in a relentless push forward, advanced with cautious determination, knowing that each step could bring them into the crosshairs of enemy fire, and often did. Casualties were sustained at every turn, as enemy defenses had been meticulously prepared and hidden within the rugged terrain. Amidst this perilous landscape, Winston Churchill personally led his elite commandos through the treacherous mountainous regions. His team moved with calculated stealth, expertly navigating around heavily fortified enemy strongholds, deliberately avoiding direct confrontations when possible. Instead, they focused on striking strategically at vital supply routes, cutting off enemy resupply chains and weakening their positions over time. Simultaneously, they gathered invaluable intelligence by covertly observing German troop movements, positions, and fortifications, providing crucial information that would guide future operations. By the month of September, the tide of the campaign had shifted favorably for the Allies as Sicily had been fully captured, an achievement that marked a significant turning point in the Mediterranean theater. Buoyed by this success, the Allied command began preparing to launch an invasion onto the mainland of Italy, aiming to open a second front and further weaken Axis forces. The planned amphibious assault was set to take place at Salerno, a location situated south of the vital port city of Naples. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans, aware of Allied intentions, were expecting an attack farther north, near Rome, and had thus concentrated their defenses in that area. The area around Salerno was believed to be lightly guarded, making it an attractive landing site for a swift and straightforward invasion. However, reality proved far more complicated. Contrary to the initial intelligence, the German defenses at Salerno had been reinforced significantly. On September the 9th, in the year of 1943, the 2nd Commando unit successfully landed at Salerno amidst a hail of enemy fire. From the very outset, they encountered formidable resistance. The Germans had been forewarned and had meticulously prepared their defenses, bringing in panzer divisions and artillery units to fortify the coastline. Within mere hours after the landing, the beachhead was subjected to relentless and overwhelming fire, effectively pinning down both American and British troops who struggled to penetrate the German positions. Their efforts to advance were thwarted, and the entire operation teetered on the brink of failure. Recognizing the peril, Churchill's commandos faced a critical mission. They were tasked with defending a vital road and rail junction at the town of Vitry-sur-Mer, a strategic point that overlooked the western approach of the Bay of Salerno. If the Germans managed to seize control of Vitry, they could leverage the high ground to unleash devastating artillery fire on the Allied landing beaches, putting the entire invasion in grave jeopardy and risking complete destruction of the invading forces. For a span of 5 days and nights, Churchill and his men remained steadfast in their defense of Vitry, holding stubbornly against repeated counterattacks launched by German infantry and armored units. These fierce engagements took place amidst a hostile environment. The soldiers fought from makeshift positions within buildings, dug trenches, and sought refuge among the rubble of destroyed structures. Despite continuous assaults, including armored tank probes, the commandos desperately repelled each wave, calling in naval gunfire support to weaken or destroy German positions whenever possible. Their resolve remained unbroken even as ammunition stockpiles diminished and casualties accumulated, their determination unwavering amid the chaos. On the night of September the 14th, Churchill received a new, urgent set of orders. German forces had successfully occupied the hills above the town of Molina, a strategic mountain pass leading down towards the Salerno beachhead. From these heights, they controlled a crucial vantage point and maintained an observation post that directed artillery fire onto the Allied positions below, severely threatening their vulnerable flank. This observation post had to be eliminated at all costs to prevent further loss of life and to maintain the integrity of the Allied landing. Churchill analyzed the terrain carefully, understanding that a direct frontal assault up the hills would be suicidal, given the well-prepared German defenses. The Germans had machine guns covering every possible approach, mortars targeting the most obvious routes, and the entire area was mined and heavily fortified, ensuring that any large-scale attack would be detected early and eradicated swiftly. Recognizing the need for a different tactic, Churchill devised an innovative plan. He decided to deploy a single soldier, an inconspicuous corporal, to infiltrate the enemy lines under cover of darkness. This approach relied on stealth and precise timing, operating on the principle that 2 men could move silently and undetected where hundreds would be spotted and stopped. Churchill believed that a small, nimble team could execute what a large force could never achieve: infiltrate, gather intelligence, and eliminate the observation post without resorting to a full-scale assault. After midnight, Churchill and the corporal quietly left the relative safety of the British lines, slipping into the night with meticulous care. Moving through the darkness, they made use of the terrain itself, crawling through drainage ditches, skirting along stone walls, and using rocky outcroppings for concealment. Their progress was slow but cautious, as they avoided German sentries by remaining low and silent, never making noise that might betray them. The night was pitch black, making visibility a challenge, but it also provided cover against enemy eyes. The Germans, caught off guard, did not expect such a daring assault from 2 men armed simply with a sword and a revolver, believing they had the advantage of numbers and firepower. After hours of careful movement, Churchill and his companion managed to reach the first German position just before dawn. Churchill noticed the faint glow of cigarettes in the darkness, a telltale sign of German soldiers engaged in their routines, relaxed and complacent, unaware of the imminent threat. Beneath the faint light, he saw German personnel manning a mortar emplacement, seemingly relaxed, not anticipating any attack that early in the morning. Silently, Churchill drew his broadsword and moved closer, prepared to strike in a stealthy and decisive manner, intending to catch them off guard and neutralize the threat that threatened the success of their broader operation. Emerging from the shadows as if conjured from the depths of a bygone era, he appeared with an air that seemed almost anachronistic in the modern battlefield. Cloaked in an aura of calm steadiness, he carried a medieval-style sword, an artifact that seemed more fitting for a historical reenactment than combat, and moved with a silent confidence that unsettled those who saw him. The German forces, caught utterly unprepared and bemused by his extraordinary appearance and composed demeanor, quickly surrendered at his mere presence. Their surrender was immediate, almost involuntary, as if they recognized that resistance was futile or perhaps simply too bewildering to muster. This unconventional officer's unexpected arrival and commanding presence caused their defenses to collapse in disarray. Throughout the unfolding night, Churchill demonstrated a remarkable level of ingenuity and bravery. Using his own lanyard, which he had cleverly fashioned from his revolver, as a makeshift rope, he skillfully led the very first German prisoner from their hiding spot to a nearby position where others could be secured. Without hesitation, he repeated this routine, approaching silently, then suddenly revealing himself like a specter from a past age, and boldly demanding the captive's surrender once again. Each time, the Germans yielded without resistance, overwhelmed by the shock of his appearance and the decisive manner in which he carried out his actions. They were simply too astounded to fight back effectively, and their confusion played into Churchill's favor. By the early hours of dawn, the British forces, under Churchill's daring leadership, had ensnared a total of 42 German soldiers. Among them was an entire mortar squad, which they promptly detained. The prisoners, in addition to the captured weaponry and equipment, were marched back along the narrow trail that led toward the safety of British positions. The wounded Germans, suffering from their injuries or perhaps shock, were carefully placed on carts that were then pushed forward by fellow prisoners, an act of both necessity and camaraderie amidst the chaos. Churchill, recalling the scene vividly later, described it as reminiscent of the chaos and heroism emblematic of the Napoleonic Wars, a vivid tableau of daring exploits on the modern battlefield. Such an extraordinary feat didn't go unnoticed. Churchill's courageous action was recognized formally, and he was awarded the Distinguished Service Order, a decoration that honored acts of exceptional bravery and leadership in battle. The official citation lauded his courage, quick thinking, and authoritative command, yet curiously omitted any mention of the unusual weapon he wielded, the sword, or his unconventional methods. Some details, it seemed, were too extraordinary for the official records, as if to preserve the myth and mystique surrounding this unorthodox soldier. By the 21st of September, the British had successfully secured the Salerno beachhead, opening a vital front along the Italian coast. This marked the beginning of an arduous campaign, the long and relentless push up the Italian peninsula toward the heart of Rome. Churchill and his specially trained commandos continued to operate fiercely ahead of the advancing main forces, engaging in daring raids behind enemy lines. Their activities included disrupting German communications, capturing prisoners, and attacking well-defended positions with a cunning that became legendary. Word of Churchill's exploits extended beyond the confines of military circles, spreading among the German ranks like wildfire. Stories circulated among the German soldiers about the British officer with the sword and the bagpipes, a figure who seemed to have stepped straight out of a medieval legend into the chaos of war. They nicknamed him the Madman, the Berserker, and saw him as a relic, a soldier from a distant past, a throwback to a more savage and tumultuous age of warfare. Some soldiers refused to believe in the reality of such a figure, dismissing him as mere legend or propaganda. while others secretly hoped that they might never encounter him in a brutal encounter on the battlefield, fearing the unpredictable fury he seemed capable of unleashing. By the spring of the year 1944, the campaign in Italy had become a grueling stalemate, an exhausting struggle that threatened to stalemate the Allied advance. The Germans fortified their defenses along the Gustav Line, holding the high ground with formidable resolve, making any breakthrough complex and costly. Recognizing that a decisive victory required opening new fronts, the Allies planned to stretch German resources thin by attacking from different directions. Among the orders issued was a transfer of Churchill's 2nd Commando Unit to Yugoslavia, where they would assist partisan fighters resisting German occupation. This new mission was dramatically perilous, for the terrain was harsh and unforgiving, and the Germans anticipated their arrival, waiting with full knowledge of Churchill's reputation and tactics. In fact, intelligence reports from the German military command had circulated extensively, describing this daring British officer, this madman, armed with a sword and playing bagpipes, long before he physically arrived on Yugoslav soil. Some German officers dismissed these reports as propaganda, exaggerated stories designed to undermine morale or to mock the enemy's eccentric hero. Others took them seriously, considering him a dangerous and unpredictable element. Yet, regardless of their skepticism, all underestimated what Churchill was truly capable of achieving through daring, ingenuity, and unconventional tactics. By the spring of the year 1944, Yugoslavia had become one of the most brutal and violent theaters of the entire war. German occupation forces controlled the major cities and vital transportation routes, establishing a firm grip over the more populated areas. Yet, deep within the rugged mountains and dense forests, a powerful resistance known as the Partisans, led by Josip Broz Tito, battled fiercely to reclaim their homeland. They dominated the wild terrains, launching frequent attacks and ambushes against German convoys and outposts, often striking with ferocity. The fighting was relentless, and casualties were heavy on both sides. Prisoners were rarely taken humanely. They were often executed or subjected to brutal reprisals. Entire villages met their doom in swift, severe retribution after partisan attacks or German reprisals, making the landscape a scarred and devastated land. The Germans had deployed over 500,000 troops to Yugoslavia, an enormous force, and yet, despite their numerical superiority, they were gradually being pushed back and losing ground in the mountainous conflict. This environment of chaos, resilience, and relentless combat set the stage for Churchill's continued involvement, an unconventional warrior who, with his sword and bagpipes, embodied the fierce spirit of resistance and daring that defined one of the most complex and brutal phases of the Second World War. During the height of World War II, the strategic alliance between the British government and the Yugoslav partisans reached a crucial turning point, reflecting a concerted effort to weaken German dominance along the fragile, war-torn Balkan coastlines. Recognizing the potential of these resilient resistance fighters, the British authorities made a decisive move to bolster their efforts by providing not only essential military supplies and weaponry, but also dispatching seasoned military advisors to assist and guide the partisan operations. The role of these advisors was significant. They were tasked with overseeing and coordinating complex guerrilla tactics, ensuring that the partisan units could effectively challenge the formidable German presence along the Adriatic shores. One of the most daring initiatives was the deployment of specialized commandos, who would serve as the frontline force during direct combat engagements, supporting and amplifying the partisan insurgencies. This marked a shift to more aggressive, coordinated assaults aimed at disrupting German logistics, communication lines, and supply routes. In April of the year 1944, the British government orchestrated the relocation of a notable group, including the iconic figure Winston Churchill and a meticulous number of commandos from what was known as the No. 2 Commando Unit. Their destination was a remote island in the Adriatic Sea, known ominously as the Island of V, a strategic outpost that overlooked vital maritime routes and offered a vantage point for launching further attacks. From this secluded island vantage point, Churchill and his elite commando unit began planning a series of daring raids aimed at destabilizing German operations along the Dalmatian coast. Churchill, embodying his famed zeal and relentless determination, immersed himself fully in the new mission. He dedicated considerable time to understanding the terrain of the region, studying the rugged coastline, mountain ranges, and narrow inlets that characterized the landscape. His interest extended beyond mere geography. He endeavored to grasp the tactics employed by the partisans, an irregular force relying on stealth, hit-and-run tactics, and knowledge of the local terrain. With this insight, Churchill meticulously devised operations focused on attacking German supply lines, aiming to cut off reinforcements and supplies from reaching their garrisons along the coast. The local partisans, who had been fighting tooth and nail in the mountains and forests for months, quickly recognized Churchill's fierce temperament and his willingness to engage on equal footing with them in combat. They were genuinely impressed by his aggressive stance, his readiness to confront the enemy directly, and his refusal to remain a mere observer. To the partisans, the arrival of the British figure, sometimes described as a madman wielding a sword, symbolized a new level of seriousness in their struggle. The Germans, meanwhile, were about to learn that they had a formidable new adversary, an outspoken, fearless, and dynamic leader who had arrived in their sector with a clear intent to fight aggressively. The initial raids orchestrated under Churchill's leadership proved to be quite successful. Using their deep knowledge of the terrain, Churchill and his team conducted several hit-and-run attacks against German outposts positioned along the coast. These assaults resulted in the destruction of equipment, the annihilation of supply stockpiles, and the capture of prisoners, thus undermining German control in the region. Churchill's fearless presence on the mountains, wielding both his sword and bagpipes, an unusual combination, became a symbol of inspiration for the partisan fighters. His boldness, moving through mountainous terrain with a sense of purpose, and his musical pipes, often played during moments of action or pause, inspired the partisans and boosted their morale. However, such bold tactics did not go unnoticed by the Germans. In response, they rapidly reinforced their garrisons, increased patrols, and heightened their defensive measures along the coast. It became evident to both sides that the situation was evolving into a more intense and complex conflict. The raids conducted by Churchill's forces grew more coordinated, with greater aggression and tactical finesse, making them increasingly difficult for German forces to counter effectively. This escalation of activity showcased a clear shift. The Germans understood that their control was under threat, and they prepared accordingly to face the growing challenge. By May of the same year, specifically, the month identified as the third in sequence, Churchill received explicit orders from British High Command to undertake a bold operation, the capture of the German-controlled island known as BR. This island held a strategic position, controlling significant shipping lanes along the Dalmatian coast, vital for both military logistics and maritime commerce. On this island was a well-fortified German garrison, numbering several hundred soldiers, who occupied positions overlooking the beaches with formidable defensive structures, including fortified bunkers and artillery placements. To seize control of BR required nothing short of a major amphibious assault, an operation demanding meticulous planning and coordination, given the strong German defenses and the engineered difficulty of landing troops securely. In preparation for the attack, Churchill assembled a diverse force composed of volunteers and seasoned operators. The contingent included 43 commandos from the specialized unit designated as Number 43, a troop from the similarly elite Number 40 Commando, and approximately 1,500 Yugoslav partisans. This diverse coalition comprised highly trained British commandos, known for their professionalism, and seasoned partisan fighters, recognized for their bravery and intimate knowledge of the local terrain. Yet, they also possessed differing capabilities. The British commandos brought exceptional tactical expertise, discipline, and combat experience, whereas the partisans were brave and resourceful, but often poorly equipped and loosely disciplined. The challenge lay in coordinating this heterogeneous force for a complex, coordinated amphibious attack, a task fraught with risk, given the differences in training, discipline, and operational procedures. The first phase of the operation commenced with an amphibious landing on the beaches of the island, aimed at establishing a foothold. Incredibly, the landings were unopposed. primarily because the German forces had already begun to withdraw from the beaches to prepare defensive positions further inland, atop the rugged hills and mountainous terrain. Churchill and his men arrived on the night of the 2nd of May, in the year of 1944, landing under the cover of darkness to maximize surprise. The initial expectations had been that the partisans, who were supposed to advance immediately and overwhelm the German positions, would act swiftly to consolidate the landing. However, the partisan commanders, faced with the formidable strength of the German fortifications, bunkers, machine gun nests, and artillery, hesitated. Rather than launching an immediate assault, they decided to delay their advance until dawn, believing that the daylight hours would provide a better chance of success by allowing them to see and plan their attack more effectively. This cautious decision, though understandable given the circumstances, incensed Churchill. His impatience was palpable. He was furious at what he saw as a dangerous delay that granted the Germans crucial time to reinforce their defenses, call in additional support, and prepare their countermeasures. Yet, he understood that forcing the partisans to attack immediately was beyond his control, and he had to accept their cautious approach. As darkness covered the island, Churchill and his men waited anxiously, fully aware that the element of surprise was slipping away. At dawn, the assault fully commenced. The two-pronged attack saw the 43rd Commando launching a flanking maneuver against the German defensive positions, attempting to outflank and outmaneuver the entrenched defenders, while Churchill himself led the more direct assault with elements from the 40 Commando, pushing straight toward the fortified German positions. Unfortunately, the partisans remained at the landing beach, hesitating to advance in tandem with the commandos, possibly hesitant after their pause or uncertain of the German defenses, thus not providing the anticipated support. This left Churchill and his specially trained troops to face the German defenses alone. The Germans, having anticipated such an attack and prepared for the worst, responded with ferocity. Machine gun fire raked the approaches and the hilltop positions, sending streams of bullets cutting through the air. Mortar rounds exploded in close proximity, creating chaos and instability among the advancing troops. Despite the relentless fire and increasing difficulties, Churchill pushed forward with incredible resilience. He maintained his composure amidst the chaos, marching onward with his characteristic determination. His bagpipes, often played during moments of rally or morale boosting, blared as he urged his men to keep going up the rugged slope toward the fortified German defenses, embodying a symbol of indomitable spirit and leadership. His presence on the battlefield, fighting alongside the commandos, playing pipes, and wielding his sword, became a legendary image of bravery and tenacity that kept the fighting spirit alive in those difficult moments. The assault abruptly came to a halt, as the relentless chaos of battle reached a temporary standstill. Men who had been bravely fighting and advancing into enemy territory began to stumble and fall amidst the deafening noise of gunfire and explosions. The supply of ammunition, which once seemed plentiful and sufficient for the task, was now rapidly dwindling, leaving soldiers with dwindling options and mounting desperation. Amid the chaos, a German mortar team had managed to locate and target Churchill's position with deadly precision. They unleashed a barrage of heavy shells, each explosion tearing through the air and crashing directly into the assembled group of commandos surrounding their commanding officer. These powerful blasts inflicted fatal injuries and caused severe wounds to nearly every soldier present, leaving them either dead or grievously wounded in an instant. All, that is, except for Churchill himself, who miraculously survived this lethal onslaught. His survival was not due to luck alone, but was a consequence of a specific circumstance. He had been standing slightly apart from the rest of his men at that critical moment, playing his bagpipes to bolster morale and encourage their attack. In a brutal twist of fate, he found himself solitary on a hillside deep within enemy-controlled territory, surrounded by the aftermath of devastation. Around him lay the bodies of comrades who had fallen, some still breathing, others beyond saving, creating a grim tableau of loss and sacrifice. The advancing German troops drew closer, eager to overrun his position. Meanwhile, Churchill's ammunition had been exhausted, leaving him defenseless and with no chance of resisting or escaping. With no other options and surrounded by enemies, he faced an impossible situation. Despite the dire circumstances, he did what a man of his character and resolve would instinctively do. He sat down quietly on a nearby rock, calmly took up his bagpipes once more, and began playing a poignant and melodious tune, the haunting Scottish lament, "Will Ye No Come Back Again?" This song, steeped in sorrow and farewell, served as his final act of defiance, a symbol of resilience against a foe that had finally caught up with him, even amid the chaos of impending captivity. The Germans approached cautiously, their suspicion mingled with disbelief and confusion. They could hardly believe their eyes. Here was a British officer, standing amidst the fallen bodies of his men, playing music while they pointed their rifles at him with deadly intent. Their hesitation was palpable. They did not open fire immediately. Perhaps they felt a mixture of curiosity and a reluctant admiration for the stoic man who faced imminent death with such calmness and dignity. Suddenly, a German grenade detonated very close to Churchill, striking him with shrapnel and rendering him unconscious. When consciousness returned, he found himself a prisoner in the grip of the enemy. The Germans transported him to Berlin for interrogation, convinced that anyone bearing the name Churchill must be linked to the British Prime Minister. They flew him under heavy guard to the German capital, hoping to obtain vital intelligence about Allied plans and operations, but their hopes were soon dashed. Jack Churchill was a man of no strategic significance to the Germans. He was not a secret agent or an intelligence asset. Instead, he was simply an officer with a love for swords, a passion for music, and a resilient spirit. The Germans transferred him to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp, a notorious facility located north of Berlin, known for holding some of the most prominent and high-profile prisoners. The camp's inmates included politicians, resistance fighters, and individuals suspected to be related to or associated with the resistance or important figures in the Allied ranks. Churchill found himself among men who had dared to oppose Hitler, defy the Nazi regime, or were suspected enemies of the state. Men whose fates seemed sealed, with many expecting executions at any moment. For the many prisoners confined there, Sachsenhausen was the final chapter of their hopes and lives. Yet for Jack Churchill, it was merely a temporary inconvenience, a challenge to be endured and overcome. Despite these bleak circumstances, he was not one to be broken easily. Less than 4 months after his incarceration, Churchill managed to escape from the camp. Within 8 months, he was once again engaged in combat, fighting with his characteristic fierce determination. Though the Germans had captured a man who could only be described as a madman with a sword, an officer who played the bagpipes and fought with unconventional heroism, they had not succeeded in defeating him or extinguishing his spirit. The architecture and purpose of Sachsenhausen concentration camp were not suited for individuals like Churchill. The camp's primary purpose was the imprisonment of political prisoners, resistance fighters, and enemies of the Nazi state. Men and women who spent their days subjected to forced labor and brutal conditions, slowly starving under the oppressive rule of the SS guards. Many of them never survived to see the end of their captivity. The guards expected complete obedience, despair, and the inevitable surrender of spirits that would lead to death. Yet Churchill refused to conform to their expectations. He was placed in a specialized part of the camp called Sonderlager I, an area designated for high-profile prisoners who might be used as leverage in negotiations or as hostages. Among his fellow inmates were diplomats, politicians, military officers, and men suspected of being related to or aligned with the Allies' leadership. All were united by their resistance, resilience, and refusal to give in despite the odds stacked against them. Among those present were 3 officers of the Royal Air Force, each of whom had previously taken part in the legendary and daring escape from Stalag Luft III, the notorious German prisoner of war camp, in March of the year 1944. This escape had become famous not only for its audacity, but also for its incredible ingenuity. Tragically, shortly after their successful breakout, 50 of their fellow escapees faced brutal retribution as they were captured and executed by the Gestapo, the secret state police of Nazi Germany, as part of a notorious crackdown. These 3 officers, by contrast, were fortunate enough to survive beyond that grim fate, but only because their captors deemed them potentially useful or valuable. Recognizing their strategic importance, the camp's authorities kept them alive, which, as it happened, gave them an unexpected edge, an opportunity that they would seize with remarkable resolve. Upon learning of their survival, then Prime Minister Winston Churchill immediately set in motion plans for his own daring bid for freedom. Deeply analytical and meticulous in his approach, Churchill devoted himself to studying every detail of the camp's layout, meticulously noting the shifts and rotations of the guards, the exact positioning of the watchtowers, the varying elevations of the fence lines, and the vulnerabilities inherent in their defenses. His keen observations revealed significant weaknesses in the perimeter security, flaws that he believed could be exploited to facilitate an escape. With this critical intelligence in hand, he began recruiting fellow prisoners, trustworthy and resourceful men willing to join his clandestine efforts. Within a matter of weeks after his arrival at the camp, Churchill had devised a comprehensive plan, a carefully considered scheme aimed at breaking free from captivity. The prisoners housed in Sonderlager, as they were classified within the camp, had access to a small garden area situated quite close to the camp's perimeter defenses. Recognizing this as a potential starting point, Churchill and his clandestine group initiated the complex process of digging a tunnel. They chose to excavate from a drainage ditch that was conveniently located within the garden, ensuring that their activities would remain hidden from prying eyes during the night hours. Working under the cover of darkness, they painstakingly removed earth and concealed the excavated dirt beneath mounds of compost and vegetation, hoping to avoid detection by guards. Their tools were humble, ordinary spoons, makeshift pieces of metal smuggled in for that purpose, and their own bare hands, which they used to claw and loosen the earth. The tunnel they carved progressively extended beneath the camp's fence, eventually reaching beyond it, passing underneath the barbed wire and guard posts. The entire length of this covert passage measured approximately 110 meters, an impressive feat of subterranean engineering, and it culminated in an exit in a wooded area beyond the camp perimeter, providing a hidden route towards freedom. On a dark and quiet night, specifically on the 23rd of September in 1944, Churchill, along with 4 other British officers, crawled through the narrow tunnel that they had so carefully constructed. Emerging into the obscurity beyond the safety of the camp, they found themselves in the shadowy countryside outside Sachsenhausen. Realizing that they had succeeded in breaking free from captivity, they quickly scattered into the surrounding German countryside, each moving with caution and purpose to avoid detection. Churchill paired up with squadron leader Bertram James, an individual renowned as one of the few who had survived such a perilous escape attempt, and the two of them set out on a daring plan. Their objective was to walk northward, aiming towards the Baltic Sea, a distance of roughly 200 kilometers, where they hoped to find a vessel willing to smuggle them safely into neutral Sweden, a country known for its neutrality and safe haven status during the war. Their journey was arduous and fraught with danger. Over the course of approximately 2 weeks, Churchill and James traversed the German landscape entirely on foot, meticulously avoiding detection at every turn. They traveled predominantly during nighttime hours, taking advantage of darkness to conceal their movements, and during the day, they found shelter in forests or hid in isolation to evade the watchful eyes of German patrols. To sustain themselves, they resorted to stealing vegetables from fields and drinking from nearby streams, making do with whatever natural resources they could find. Under no circumstances did they venture onto roads or into towns, knowing that their ragged appearances and language barriers would betray them as escapees, and thus increase the risk of capture. The weather gradually grew colder, and their clothing was woefully inadequate for the harsh conditions. Without maps, compasses, or supplies beyond what they could pilfer along their route, their journey depended entirely on their resourcefulness, instincts, and a touch of luck. As they neared their hoped-for destination, the Baltic coast, their luck finally ran out. They were within just a few kilometers of the shoreline when a German patrol came upon them near the town of Rostock. The soldiers, suspicious and alert, demanded identification, but Churchill and James had none to present. Recognized as escaped prisoners from Sachsenhausen, they were promptly arrested, subjected to interrogation, and ultimately identified as individuals who had previously escaped from German captivity. Their daring attempt to reach freedom was foiled, and they were returned into captivity, although not to the same camp they had fled from. Churchill was transferred to a distant German prison located deep within the Austrian Alps, far away from the front lines and any Allied forces. This camp was situated in a remote mountain region, starkly contrasting with the camp near Sachsenhausen, and posed new challenges for the imprisoned. By late 1944, the tide of the war was undeniably turning against Nazi Germany. The Soviet Red Army was pressing relentless advances from the east, steadily closing in on German-held territory. Meanwhile, the Allied forces, including American, British, French, and other Allied troops, were pushing forward through France, making their way toward the Rhine River, the last major natural barrier separating Western Europe from the heart of Germany. Despite these strategic victories, life for a prisoner trapped in an Austrian mountain camp during this tumultuous period was bleak and uncertain. The winter of 1944 into 1945 was particularly harsh. Churchill observed from his confinement as the German war effort was collapsing before his eyes. Allied bombers roared overhead daily, unleashing relentless raids. News reports filtered through the camp, detailing the swift Soviet advances into Eastern Europe, the fall of Berlin, and Hitler's increasingly frantic and desperate orders to his remaining forces. The camp guards grew nervous and restless, aware that the Allied victory was inevitable and that they could soon face justice for their crimes committed over the course of the war. In late April of the year 1945, amid the chaos and collapse of Nazi Germany, Churchill and roughly 140 other prominent prisoners, including officers and notable figures, were transferred from their Alpine imprisonment in Austria to the Tyrol region in Italy. This move was part of a broader effort to relocate high-profile prisoners further south, away from the collapsing German front lines and into territories where Allied forces had begun to advance. The shifting of these prisoners marked a significant moment as the final stages of the war unfolded, and the long, torturous period of imprisonment drew closer to its inevitable conclusion. The German forces had devised a tactical plan that centered around using certain prisoners as leverage in their negotiations with the advancing Allied armies. These unfortunate individuals were forcibly marched through rugged mountain terrain, under strict guard, uncertain whether they would be released unharmed or face execution at the hands of their captors. The journey through the treacherous passes was filled with tension and dread, as the prisoners had no knowledge of what their captors truly intended. The situation reached an unexpected turning point. A group of prisoners managed to approach the senior officers of the German Wehrmacht and openly voiced their fears, pleading that they feared they would be brutally murdered by the SS guards if left in their captivity. These prisoners, exhausted and desperate, spoke with courage and clarity, hoping to be heard. The German officers listened attentively to these pleas, perhaps weighing their options or feeling the weight of the moral dilemma. Among the German units that responded was a specialized fighting force led by Captain Wichard von Alvensleben, a man of notable military experience. This unit swiftly moved into action to protect the prisoners from immediate harm, intending to prevent a possible massacre. Their force considerably outnumbered the small contingent of SS guards responsible for the prisoners' custody, creating a tense and precarious standoff. The situation grew increasingly intense, with both sides wary of violence, yet prepared for confrontation if necessary. After a period of high tension, the German troops loyal to Captain Slaben's command managed to force the SS guards to retreat, effectively abandoning the prisoners to their own devices. Left behind in a modest Italian village, these individuals found themselves free from their captors, yet stranded behind enemy lines. They were no longer in direct danger of execution, but now faced the harsh reality of being caught in a turbulent territory controlled by the enemy. Most of these liberated prisoners chose to remain in the village, biding their time and waiting anxiously for the arrival of the Allied forces that they hoped would bring rescue and safety. Their lives hung in uncertainty, caught between victory and peril. Yet, not everyone chose to wait passively. Among them was Jack Churchill, a British soldier with a fierce spirit and an unyielding resolve. Unlike most others, he decided not to linger in the village with the fragile hope of eventual rescue. Churchill had endured nearly an entire year as a prisoner, having first been captured, then making a daring escape. only to be recaptured again. Throughout this ordeal, he had survived against all odds, and he was determined not to remain idle while the war still persisted. Resolute in his decision, Churchill commenced a determined trek southward, aiming to reach Allied lines where he could rejoin the fight. His journey through the unforgiving landscape of the Italian Alps spanned over 150 kilometers on foot, during which he traversed formidable mountain passes and carefully evaded German patrols that were still scattered across the countryside. Despite his determination, Churchill was not unscathed. His ankle was badly injured during the trek, making each step painful and difficult. To make matters worse, he had no food supplies, no weapons for self-defense, and no official identification to confirm his identity or rank. Nonetheless, he pressed on relentlessly, driven by an unbreakable will and an innate sense of duty. After enduring 8 arduous days of relentless walking, Churchill finally arrived in the historic town of Verona. In this place, he encountered an American armored reconnaissance unit, which was patrolling the area. The Americans were taken aback by the sight of the unkempt, rugged British officer emerging from the mountains, an individual who appeared as if he had stepped out of a different era, clad in attire that bore no official insignia and carrying no credentials. Churchill, despite lacking formal documentation, managed to convince them of his identity and purpose through sheer force of personality, commanding presence, and a series of compelling stories. He spoke passionately about swords, bagpipes, and the German prisoners he had captured at knife point, weaving vivid tales that left a strong impression. His determination and charisma ultimately persuaded the Americans to facilitate his return to Britain through military channels. By the time Churchill reached his homeland, it was the month of May in the year of 1945, and Europe was reveling in the cessation of hostilities. The German government had surrendered unconditionally, and the concentration camps, symbols of unimaginable suffering, were being liberated across the continent. The fighting in Europe was over, marking the end of a long and devastating chapter in history. However, as joyful as this moment was, it also carried the sobering realization that the broader conflict of the Second World War was still ongoing. The war in the Pacific theater had not yet concluded. Thousands of British soldiers remained engaged in fierce combat across regions like Burma, Malaya, and dozens of Southeast Asian islands, where many continued to pay the ultimate price, fighting under brutal conditions. Without hesitation, Churchill instantly requested a transfer to the Far East Theater, eager and determined to re-engage in battle against the Japanese. His desire was fueled by a yearning to take his sword into one more confrontation, to play his bagpipes on yet another beachhead, and to demonstrate that the ancient ways of warfare, heroism, bravery, and honor, still held significance in the modern era. His request received approval from the War Office, which recognized his passionate commitment and unique fighting spirit. By the summer of that year, Jack Churchill found himself aboard a ship heading eastward, bound toward Burma and ultimately Japan. His mission was to continue the fight, to add another chapter to his wartime story, and to uphold the values he cherished. Yet, he was completely unaware that history was on the brink of witnessing a transformational event, one that would forever alter the face of warfare, the advent of atomic weaponry. While Churchill was somewhere over India, en route to his next assignment, an American B-29 bomber dropped a single atomic bomb on Hiroshima, a city that would never be the same again. This devastating weapon annihilated approximately 80,000 people in an instant, rendering its victims into a mass of ash and broken lives. Just 3 days later, a second atomic bomb was deployed on Nagasaki, causing further destruction and loss of life. The scale of devastation was unprecedented, and the world reeled from the horror of these new weapons of mass destruction. On the 15th day of August in the year of 1945, Japan announced its surrender, bringing an end to the Second World War. The victory was hailed internationally, but for Churchill and many others, the news was overshadowed by feelings of bitter disappointment. The war, in its most brutal form, had finally concluded, yet the impact of the atomic age had only just begun to unfold, warning humanity of new and unprecedented dangers yet to come. After months of meticulous preparation and relentless planning, he was finally ready to undertake an operation aimed at invading Japan. For countless weeks, he had immersed himself in understanding every facet of Japanese military strategy, studying their tactics with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He examined their defensive fortifications, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses in minute detail, and tried to comprehend the deeply ingrained fighting spirit that animated the Japanese soldiers. His overarching plan was to lead a team of highly trained commandos, armed with his trusted sword and the distinctive sound of bagpipes, onto the beaches of Japan, just as he had previously done in the rugged terrains of Norway, the Mediterranean landscapes of Sicily, and the various battlefields of Yugoslavia. He envisioned a daring assault, one that would be as symbolic as it was strategic, an audacious strike designed to catch the enemy off guard and demonstrate British resilience and courage. Yet, fate decreed otherwise. The planned invasion was suddenly called off. There would be no final, climactic engagement, no opportunity for him to test his mettle against yet another determined adversary on the battlefield, and no chance to prove himself once more under fire. This abrupt change in circumstances became legendary among his comrades and those who served alongside him, often recounted with a mixture of admiration and awe. The stories about him feature a peculiar anecdote. He remarked, in a darkly humorous tone, that without the destructive power of the American atomic bombs, the war might have persisted for another decade, or even longer. A grim, almost sardonic joke that nonetheless revealed something fundamental about his outlook on conflict. It suggested that, for him, the conclusion of the war, with its associated destruction and loss, had come only through the horrific, unprecedented power of nuclear weapons. His comment was a stark reflection of his complex character, a man for whom the chaos of war was not merely a backdrop, but a source of vitality, a realm where he felt most alive and most authentically himself, all the more so when danger and death hovered close by. To him, peace, calm, ordered, and stable, remained an alien concept, unfamiliar and unappealing. Following the end of active hostilities, the British military quickly found itself puzzled about what to do with Jack Churchill. His temperament and style of service were incompatible with the laid-back, routine garrison duties that peace demanded. His energy and aggression seemed wasted in peacetime responsibilities, while his eccentricity set him apart from the typical officer. As a result, he was a figure of both fascination and frustration, too unconventional for the conventional staff positions and too renowned. His service record was one of extraordinary distinction, to be overlooked. Throughout his career, Churchill had amassed a remarkable list of commendations and achievements. His decorations included a Distinguished Service Order with a bar to indicate a second award, a Military Cross with a bar, and multiple mentions in dispatches, recognizing his consistent bravery and leadership. His combat record spanned numerous theaters. He fought valiantly in France, participated decisively in operations in Norway, Sicily, and Italy, and played a key role in Yugoslavia. Notably, he escaped from a concentration camp, an act of remarkable resilience and daring, and he personally captured 42 prisoners, an extraordinary feat, especially considering he did so wielding only his sword. Yet, despite his decorated status, the War Office reassigned him to administrative duties in Burma, overseeing the transition from wartime to peacetime. Churchill found this kind of work intolerably dull. He had little patience for the bureaucratic paperwork that filled his days. He lacked interest in the political negotiations and diplomatic compromises that peacekeeping often required. His active, combat-minded nature refused to be stifled by these duties, and he repeatedly requested transfers back to more frontline, action-oriented units. He volunteered eagerly for dangerous missions, always seeking any opportunity that would allow him to return to the kind of soldiering he understood intimately. His restless personality and relentless drive made him stand out even among seasoned warriors, and his frustrations with the subdued pace of peace led him to pursue roles where his skills and instincts could be put to the test. By the year of 1946, the landscape of the British Empire was shifting rapidly and dramatically. Decolonization was gaining unstoppable momentum, with India demanding independence after centuries of British rule, and the unrest in Palestine escalating into outright chaos. Across Africa and Asia, colonial territories stirred with nationalist movements, each seeking to break free from imperial control and forge their own identities. The empire that Churchill had spent his life defending was transforming into something unrecognizable and uncertain. In 2047, Churchill was transferred to Palestine, serving as second-in-command of the 1st Battalion Highland Light Infantry. The situation there was becoming perilously unstable. Jewish refugees fleeing the horrors of the Holocaust spilled into the territory, demanding the establishment of their own homeland, a sovereign state free from persecution and violence. Meanwhile, Arab Palestinians, fiercely opposed to the influx and what they saw as an invasion of their land, resisted these efforts, leading to widespread unrest. British soldiers found themselves caught in the middle, trying desperately to uphold order amid mounting violence. Both sides engaged in attacks against British military positions, viewing the soldiers as outsiders or obstacles to their aspirations. The violence grew more intense throughout the years of 1947 and into 1948, with Jewish militant groups launching bombings against British installations and Arab fighters ambushing convoys transporting Jewish settlers and supplies. The tension reached a boiling point when, in May of 1948, the British government announced its plan to withdraw from Palestine altogether, leaving the region to be decided by the confronting sides themselves in a full-scale civil war. Everyone understood that this withdrawal presaged a brutal, prolonged conflict, with fighting forces on both sides determined to claim victory. In the midst of this turmoil, a particular incident occurred on the 13th of April, 1948, that exemplified the tense and violent nature of the conflict. A convoy composed of Jewish medical personnel, comprising doctors, nurses, medical students, and patients, was ambushed while traveling on the road leading to Hadassah Hospital set on Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. The attack was carried out by Arab fighters, who descended upon the convoy wielding rifles and Molotov cocktails, aiming to inflict maximum damage. The security forces intended to protect the convoy, but their response was insufficient. They failed to intervene effectively or prevent the assault, allowing the fighters to carry out their deadly ambush. This event was emblematic of the broader chaos and hostility that engulfed the region during that tumultuous period, an ongoing struggle where moments of fragile hope and humanitarian effort were often shattered by violence and discord. Approximately 77 individuals lost their lives in what has since become widely recognized as the tragic event known as the Hadassah Convoy Massacre. While Winston Churchill was not physically present at the scene of this devastating incident, he nevertheless played a crucial and active role in dealing with the disastrous aftermath. The surviving members of the Jewish medical community, including doctors, nurses, and staff who had been serving at Hadassah Hospital, found themselves stranded on Mount Scopus. This strategic location, which was previously a place of refuge and healing, was now encircled by hostile forces and hostile territory that made escape impossible. The medical personnel could not depart safely, nor could they access essential supplies needed to sustain their operations and their patients, leaving them in an increasingly dire and precarious situation. The grim reality they faced was one of imminent slow starvation due to limited food supplies, coupled with the danger of violent attacks or even targeted killings by hostile forces seeking to prevent their rescue or to cause further chaos. In response to this urgent humanitarian crisis, Churchill took it upon himself to orchestrate a daring evacuation. He meticulously coordinated efforts with British military units, local Jewish authorities, and even Arab leaders in the region, attempting to secure a corridor of safety for those trapped on Mount Scopus. Churchill's involvement was hands-on. He personally supervised and oversaw the complex and risky operation, moving through contested and heavily guarded areas with a composed, commanding presence. His calm demeanor and unwavering confidence played a pivotal role in persuading hostile factions to permit a safe passage. Through his leadership and negotiation skills, he was able to facilitate the rescue of approximately 700 Jewish individuals, including doctors, medical students, and patients, who were extracted from the encircled mount in what was a highly perilous mission. When later questioned about how he approached such perilous negotiations, Churchill offered a response that reflected his characteristic simplicity and practicality. He explained that his strategy was rooted in the belief that adversaries were less inclined to open fire on someone who was smiling at them. This insight into human psychology encapsulated a core principle he had applied repeatedly throughout his military career. By maintaining confidence, exhibiting composure, and refusing to display fear, Churchill believed one could influence even the most hostile opponents and achieve objectives that mere firepower could not accomplish. These skills of diplomacy, combined with his courageous leadership, proved instrumental in saving lives during a period of chaos and danger. Churchill's time in Palestine drew to a close shortly before the British Army's official withdrawal in May of the year 1948. That same month marked the declaration of the State of Israel, a groundbreaking event that culminated decades of conflict and struggle. The ensuing Arab-Israeli War erupted almost immediately, marking the beginning of a long, complex, and often violent conflict that would persist for generations. Churchill, witnessing these historic and tumultuous events from afar, departed from the region as the British presence drew to an end. Returning to Britain, Winston Churchill found himself at a crossroads. His illustrious military career was gradually winding down, and he was only 41 years of age. Having participated in the most significant conflict humanity had ever known, fighting in the greatest war in history, he came home a seasoned veteran. He had survived wounds sustained on battlefields, endured captivity, and endured the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. For his bravery and service, Churchill had earned numerous honors and decorations, distinctions that many soldiers could only dream of acquiring. Yet, despite his remarkable achievements, he faced an uncertain future, unsure of how to proceed with the next chapter of his life. The options offered by the British military, training assignments, staff positions, administrative roles, did not excite him. He accepted these roles out of a sense of duty but lacked enthusiasm for them. In an effort to recapture his adrenaline, Churchill took up the challenge of qualifying as a parachutist in his 40s, deliberately jumping from aircraft just to experience the thrill of free fall once again. He also dedicated himself to training a new generation of soldiers in advanced commando tactics, passing on the combat skills he had learned during his years of service in Scotland and across various European theaters. Nevertheless, he found that peacetime military life could never truly match the adrenaline-fueled intensity of war, which had always been the driving force behind his passion. Churchill yearned for a fresh challenge, a new way to feel alive and engaged. Then, through a series of unlikely circumstances, he discovered a surprising and entirely new pursuit, one that would redefine his later years and reveal a hidden side of his character. The man known for fighting with swords and longbows, who had stormed enemy beaches amid the deafening sounds of bagpipes, and who had escaped from Nazi concentration camps, was about to find an unexpected passion. He was about to become one of the pioneering surfers in the history of Britain, opening a new chapter in his adventurous life. On the 21st of July in the year 1955, a man then aged 48, a British Army officer with decades of experience and a legacy of heroism, stood on the muddy banks of the River Severn in the small village of Gloucestershire, England. In his hands, he held a homemade surfboard, fashioned with ingenuity and determination. His eyes fixed on the flowing water, scanning anxiously for the telltale signs of the tidal bore, a formidable wave that repetitively travels upstream from the nearby Bristol Channel, arriving at the river's surface roughly twice each day. The local fishermen, who had spent generations observing the river and its unpredictable currents, considered Churchill's actions to be an act of madness. They had seen the river's waves many times, but had never seen anyone attempt to ride them, let alone with a homemade board. Despite skepticism and disbelief among the seasoned fishermen, Churchill was undeterred. He paddled out into the murky, swirling waters of the river with quiet resolve, waiting patiently for the right moment to begin his daring experiment, driven by a desire to experience the thrill and challenge of surfing in an altogether different environment. In the distant horizon, a slender, shimmering white streak gradually took shape, a sign of movement against the flow of a river's current, cutting through the water like an arrow in flight. It was not what oceanographers would call a vast wave, perhaps only about 5 feet tall at its zenith, but it was definitely a wave nonetheless, one that presented a rare opportunity for adventure. It was in this moment that Churchill, with his characteristic resolve and unshakable spirit, made a decision that exemplified his lifelong pursuit of thrill and mastery. He was determined to ride this river wave. Acting swiftly, he managed to grasp the wave's essence, not in a metaphorical sense, but quite literally, by catching hold of the swift-moving water, and for more than a mile upstream. He surfed it as if he were riding a natural saddle carved out of the rushing river itself. In that act, he stepped into an exclusive company. He became one of the earliest individuals in Britain to conquer a river wave in such an exhilarating manner, carving out a unique chapter in the annals of British adventure sports. That daring feat epitomized everything that had come to define Churchill's character: a penchant for the absurd, an appreciation for danger, and an innate desire to be utterly immersed in the experience rather than passively watching from the sidelines. No, he had no intention of merely observing the wave pass him by. He had to be on it, to feel its power beneath him, to control it with his own strength, and to master its wild energy as he had mastered the skill of shooting a longbow, wielding a broadsword, or playing the bagpipes. In 45 years, Churchill had moved from military service to a revered role as a statesman, his personal pursuits reflecting a continued hunger for challenge and mastery. After concluding his distinguished career in the British Army in 1959, he retired with the rank of lieutenant colonel. During his military tenure, which spanned over 3 decades, he had fought in a great war that changed the world's landscape, a global conflict that forever altered the course of history, and had taken part in numerous smaller, less well-known conflicts. His service was marked by bravery, resilience, and a series of honors awarded by various nations, each recognizing his contribution and sacrifice. The dangers he faced during those tumultuous years were immense. He had experienced encounters and situations that would have claimed the lives of most men multiple times over. Yet, by the time he stepped away from active duty, he was 52 years old and finally at peace with the quieter, calmer world of civilian life. His retirement, much like his military career, was characterized by its unconventionality and eccentricity. Churchill developed an unexpected but sincere passion for radio-controlled model boats. He built meticulous, detailed replicas of warships, skillfully sailing them across ponds near his home, relishing each moment of control and miniature naval combat. His interest extended to restoring old steamboats, lovingly refurbishing and then piloting them along the River Thames, the same waters that had seen him surf the river wave, navigating the narrow, winding passages between the historic towns of Richmond and Oxford. His connection to traditional military and regimental customs endured. He continued to play the bagpipes at memorial ceremonies, gatherings of regiments, and commemorations, serving as a living link to the valiant traditions of commandos he had helped shape during his military service. Churchill's daily commute on the train between his residence and London became a legendary story among his fellow travelers. Each evening, as his train neared his neighborhood, he would unhesitatingly open the window, reach out, and throw his briefcase onto the tracks below. Naturally, most passengers, unacquainted with the reason behind his peculiar action, presumed he had lost his mind, some even fearing he was acting erratically or dangerously. However, Churchill had carefully calculated the precise spot where his garden bordered the railway line. Every evening, as the train approached that point, his briefcase would land effortlessly in his backyard, sparing him the effort of carrying it all the way from the station. It was a clever, quiet solution to a minor logistical problem, born of a blend of practicality and his characteristic flair for the unconventional. When people sometimes inquired about his wartime exploits, Churchill remained modest, choosing not to boast about the acts of heroism or danger he had faced. He seldom emphasized the number of enemy soldiers he had killed or the prisoners he had captured. Instead, he preferred to speak simply and truthfully about his experiences. He did not inflate his role in military operations nor take credit for victories that belonged to many others. His accounts were straightforward and sincere, sometimes recalling moments of personal courage, but always emphasizing truth over bravado. His son Malcolm often recalled how Churchill would openly discuss the war with anyone willing to listen, particularly over a glass of wine in the evenings. These conversations were candid, free-flowing, and illuminating, yet his father rarely sought recognition or praise for his deeds, content instead with the quiet pride of a life well lived amid the chaos of war. As the years passed and the world continued to evolve rapidly, Churchill observed the shifting landscape of global power and technology. The mighty British Empire, which had once stretched across vast territories, gradually dissolved, giving way to new geopolitical realities. The Cold War emerged, dividing the continents and forging rivalries on a scale previously unimagined, transforming Europe into a divided landscape of ideologies and allegiances. Scientific and technological progress revolutionized warfare. Missiles that could guide themselves through the air replaced traditional artillery. Jet-powered aircraft replaced the slower propeller-driven planes of the past, and nuclear weapons, with their unprecedented destructive power, made conventional battles seem almost outdated. The very nature of war changed completely, drifting away from the personal valor and swordsmanship of Churchill's youth to complex technological conflicts. The kind of combat in which Churchill had fought, wielding swords and pipes, relying on personal bravery and physical endurance, had become nothing more than a historical curiosity, a chapter from a bygone era. It was a time when courage meant much more than mere hardware. It embodied personal resolve, resilience, and the strength of character. Churchill's life drew to an end on the 8th of March in the year 1996, when he was 98 years old. His passing marked the conclusion of an extraordinary life that had spanned almost a century of history. By then, he had outlived most of his comrades from the Commandos and survived many of the men he had led into battle across Europe, including most of his fellow prisoners from Sachsenhausen concentration camp. His life had been an unending series of battles, victories, and sacrifices, each shaped by his relentless spirit and unwavering sense of duty. His legacy, woven into the fabric of history, was a testament to resilience, courage, and an unyielding commitment to his country and its ideals. Jack Churchill, a man whose life story reads like a legendary adventure, passed away peacefully in the town of Sicily, located in England. Surrounded by loved ones and family members, he left behind a legacy that spanned a remarkable lifetime, one that was ultimately distant from the icy, windswept beaches of Norway and the sun-baked hills of Yugoslavia, where he once fought. His departure from this world marked the end of an extraordinary chapter, but capturing the essence of his life in words proved to be a daunting task. An obituary, attempting to distill such a vivid and multifaceted existence, found it challenging to fully encompass the depth of his character and deeds. A British newspaper, however, went so far as to suggest that if a figure like Churchill had never existed, it would have been impossible to create him as a fictional hero. His story, they argued, was so fantastical that no invented character could plausibly match his feats. Imagine a man fighting battles in an era dominated by tanks and mechanized warfare, wielding a longbow with deadly skill, an anachronism that defied the norms of modern combat. Picture another, capturing prisoners with a sword amidst the chaos of machine guns, embodying a dauntless spirit that refused to be subdued by technological odds. Visualize him playing bagpipes, all while mortar shells exploded perilously close, filling the air with noise and danger, yet not silencing his spirit. Envision his daring escape from a Nazi concentration camp, a feat so brave it entailed walking 150 kilometers on foot to reach safety. Or recall his love for the thrill of surfing river waves, juxtaposed with his refusal to accept that the relentless march of modernity had no room for medieval warriors wielding swords and banners. This extraordinary man was known as Jack Churchill. He was not the most decorated soldier of the Second World War. He did not earn the most medals, nor did he lead the most decisive campaigns. He was not renowned for strategic brilliance that altered the course of history or for commanding armies that changed the tide of war. Instead, what he represented was far more fundamental and profound. He demonstrated that individual courage, raw and uncompromising, still carried immense weight. He proved that unconventional thinking and daring action could overcome even the most formidable advantages in firepower and technology. He showed that one determined person, armed with nothing more than resilience and resolve, could accomplish feats that armies might never achieve, a testament to the power of faith in one's own strength. His legacy endures through the special operations forces and commandos that trace their roots back to the rough training grounds of Scotland where his ideals and methods were forged. Every soldier who has ever been told that a particular mission was impossible, only to refuse to accept that verdict, owes a part of their inspiration to figures like Jack Churchill. His life story ignites the belief that true heroism doesn't always require sophisticated weaponry or large numbers, but instead depends on undying grit and the will to fight against overwhelming odds. If this story resonates with you as deeply as it has with countless others, I kindly ask you to do a small favor. Press that like button. Each single click acts as a signal to YouTube algorithms, encouraging this narrative to reach more people who may need to hear it. It spreads the memory of remarkable individuals who refuse to be mundane or defeated by circumstance. Also, consider subscribing and turning on notifications, because our mission is to uncover and preserve stories that history often forgets. Stories of courageous officers who defeated enemies with swords, soldiers who played bagpipes amid flying shrapnel, and men who escaped from seemingly inescapable camps to fight again. Every day, we delve into dusty archives and bring to light these stories, touching lives and inspiring courage in the process. These tales feature real people, genuine heroism, and moments that remind us of the indomitable spirit of humankind. Please leave a comment right now, telling us where you are tuning in from. Are you watching from the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, Norway, or elsewhere? Our community extends across the entire globe, unified by a shared interest in history's unsung heroes. Remember, you are not just passive viewers. They are vital custodians of these memories. Share your location. Tell us if a relative served in such battles, or if you've heard of Mad Jack Churchill before today. Your participation helps ensure these stories remain alive, vibrant, and remembered for generations to come. Thank you for watching and for contributing to the preservation of Jack Churchill's remarkable legacy. Thanks to you, this man's heroism will not fade into silence. He was a true warrior, and he deserved to be recognized and remembered. Your support makes sure that his story, and the stories of others like him, continue to inspire and remind us all of the extraordinary potential of the human spirit.